This episode offers a view of Taishokoto strings and levers, how that plays into tonality, and if it's related to pricing. To start, let's take a very brief look at the Taishokoto we're checking out today. I don't want to go into heavy detail since the device specs aren't important to the point, but we can name them, show pictures, and at the end will be a demo if you're interested in comparing them. We have the Kimura Shion. We have the Comnics Shonichi, which was featured in episode 7 on Comnics. Then we have the Sansogakki Hana Utage. Then we have the Kimura Rindou, and finally the Okayama Club Special from Zenon. Now, as you may have noticed from the Taishokoto we're taking a look at, there's some styles shared between them. If we take a look at what I'm calling the fancy style, it consists of the Kimura Shion, the Comnics, and the Sansogakki. These are all the top-of-the-line models, which when brand new cost an arm and a leg from the company, hence fancy models. We can garner that they steal some design choices from each other in sizing, shaping, tuning pegs, button choice, etc. With this in mind, let's take a quick peek at the sides of all the devices. They all look somewhat similar, but what I think you'll notice is that the fancier models tend to have more even return heights for the buttons and more evenly trimmed frets. Interestingly though, even for the fancy models, there's a variance in string height and button height. For string height, we can look at the distance off the fretboard, as well as if that height is constant from the leftmost button of the fretboard to the rightmost button. In this regard, the Rindou has a very low and even string height, even though it's not a fancy model, while the Sansogakki has a somewhat low string height, but very obvious incline in the string from left to right. Then in direct contrast to that, the cheaper Zenon also has an incline. Then we can look at the button height. The fancy Comnics model has a very low button height close to the string, whereas the Kimura Shion has a much higher button height. In both cases, the consistency of where the button returns to is extremely consistent, but the return height itself differs. So then we have to take a pause and ask ourselves what this all means. We have a lot of variables to keep track of, so let's list them out. 1. Button return height consistency. This seems to be better on the fancier models. 2. Fret trim also seems better on the fancier models. 3. String height, no cost relation. 4. String level, no cost relation. And 5. Button height, no cost relation. Looking at the return height, the argument would be if I have more consistent return height, I can more readily tell from the time my finger hits the key how far down to depress it, thus more accurate pitch. My personal opinion is, kind of. What matters to my brain is how far the keys depress after force is engaged, so if you have some really stiff keys and there's feedback force from the second your fingers touch, then yeah, that would throw you off. What often occurs though is that the feedback force happens when the levers touch the string. This idea of return height is possible to have an effect, but not a huge one. Second, fret trim. The argument is that if one fret is higher than the other, depressing a key the same amount for both frets will lead to a different pitch for each. This one is for sure an issue. What you'll notice is that some Taishokoto actually have larger frets versus some with smaller frets. If you depress just enough, you'll get the perfect pitch. Depress a little more and you'll change said pitch as you bend the string further over that fret and change the effective resonating length. This is the same as if you perform a bend on a guitar. A higher fret can be very nice in that it gives you more expressivity by playing. Imagine the larger, taller fret gives you more area to push that string over and depress it. But then this is a double-edged sword. You need to be more careful how much you depress it over that larger fret. Also, with these larger frets, you'll often find that the per fret height varies a little more. Thus, you need to depress each key a little different, which can be very difficult when playing fast. Only so much can be done when you have to adjust by ear for each note as you're playing. On the flip side, you'll notice the fancier models attempt to have a consistent, very low fret. The idea is that if they're all low, then you can slam the lever down and there's no change of pitch variance. Now you press down a given amount, you can't overpress, and if the fret heights are consistent, then so's your pitch. This of course comes at the cost of expressivity, though you can still manage some through wiggle of the lever left and right. Third, string height. This one is similar to the previous two arguments. When you hit the string, it causes some feedback force, thus your brain tells you how far to press after the feedback is received. That said, if the height of the string is consistent for each press, this just becomes muscle memory. So is this a tonality issue? Probably not. It can, however, affect the speed at which you play, since your total finger movement is more per note. aka if I need to press the button further or the string further for each note, it gives me less time to press each note when I'm playing things fast. This can also affect the noise of the instrument, depending on how far the string rebounds or if it hits against the lever when you let it go, it'll make a sound. I do like a little bit of that bounce back to give that classic twang of the Taishokoto. 4. String level. Based on what we've talked about thus far, if the string height varies across the instrument, then when you encounter the feedback force of hitting the string, now dependent on where you are on the instrument, you'll need to press down further or less. This severely impacts playing. 5. Finally, we have the button height. Much like the return height, since a lot of the feedback force comes when you hit the string, the distance down to the string likely won't affect your tone, but it can hamper your playing speed if you need to press down further each time. In addition, if you need to slam a button down further, faster, harder, etc., you'll likely create more button noise. So let's take a quick overview of what we figured out. 1. Return height consistency, in my opinion, not super important. 2. Fret trim, huge effect. 3. String height, can affect play speed and sound characteristics. 4. String level, huge effect. 5. Button height, can affect play speed and sound characteristics. So if we're looking for some form of conclusion, let's note that 2 and 4 are very important, aka fret trim and string level. And if we look at the fact that the fret trim we said is better on a fancier model and string level has no cost relation, now we can get an idea what to look for in a fancy model. Obviously, we're ignoring the other factors of cost, aka wood type, tuning pegs, button feel, etc., but the takeaway here would be that if you are getting an expensive model, check the frets. As for the string level, this is a factor of bridge height. Sometimes you can just adjust a floating bridge to fix this, or I've actually trimmed the bridge to get a better level. Sometimes, though, the instrument has a fixed bridge and factory QC just didn't do a great job, so it's something to check before buying. Now let's talk about other lever types real quick. I wanted to pop up on screen a bunch of other levers you may see. There's straight ones, slightly curved ones, one with a huge bend in the metal portion, etc. There are so many different possibilities that can be hard to judge from a picture. One thing to keep your eye out for, I've tried levers where the curvature is slightly off, so you'll press down and it'll press down a little more in the front than in the back. This gets you a slightly different pitch on the front string than on the back string. It's not terrible, honestly. We're talking about a 2-cent difference in pitch, which can throw in a kind of fun lo-fi vibe, but it's something to keep your eye out for. Then another weird example would be the Comnics levers with a bolt in the middle. These bolt-on pieces are there purely to prevent the lever from flexing too far from side to side. This is nice because instead of coming straight down from top to bottom, which you're supposed to do, sometimes you can hit it from the side and it flexes a little. All of these funky levers add some interesting flavor, but I wanted to get across that their effect on pitch and overall tone is much less than the points we discussed earlier. And now that you're overly acquainted with the pros and cons of the devices and how it should affect tone, let's end with some demo songs on the devices. If you can hear the effects we talked about, great, everything is as it should be. If you can't, great, maybe you can save some money. I can definitely tell you though that as someone who's played a lot of Taishokoto, these things at least matter to the player.